The jungle wasn't the most welcoming place for a guy like Zhang Yu. But then again, what could you expect from a covert military operation designed to push human boundaries beyond the norm? The mission was supposed to be simple: get in, neutralize the target, and get out. But there's nothing simple about being a walking, talking, genetically enhanced killing machine in a place that was practically designed to kill you first. Zhang could feel the humidity in the air, thick and oppressive, like the jungle itself was trying to smother him. His boots sloshed through the mud with the faintest squelch, and his senses went into overdrive, scanning the dense greenery around him. His hawk-eyed vision gave him the sharpest clarity, cutting through the trees and underbrush like they were made of paper. A flash of movement caught his attention, a flicker of something in the corner of his vision. Instinctively, his finger slid onto the trigger of his assault rifle, but it was just a small bird, flapping its wings and darting away. The jungle was alive. Every rustling leaf and snapping twig screamed danger. It was the perfect place for a genetic freak like Zhang to blend in, to be invisible in the chaos. His reflexes were sharper than anyone could imagine. The cheetah-enhanced speed in his legs allowed him to cover ground faster than a car could accelerate, while his enhanced hearing, tuned like a high-end stereo system, could pick up the faintest footstep from 100 yards away. But none of these gifts were ever given for free. They came at a price Zhang was learning to regret. Zhang's comms crackled, and his best friend, Lin Ji, came through with a voice that was tinged with the kind of dry humor Zhang had come to expect from him. "Yo, Zhang. Any chance you're not about to burn down the jungle on your own?" Zhang smirked, but his response was more out of habit than any real amusement. "I'm trying to stay low. Unlike you, I don't need a chainsaw to cut through trees." "Touché," Lin Ji replied with a chuckle. "Just don't get eaten by one of the super mutants. We're still waiting for you to bring back a souvenir." Zhang rolled his eyes, even though he knew Ji was probably watching from a nearby satellite feed. The term super mutants was a euphemism for the genetically enhanced soldiers the enemy was creating in this jungle. Zhang was here on a mission to neutralize one, codenamed Bearclaw, a bioengineered beast with the body of a grizzly and the mind of a psychopath. He had been on the run for days, and Zhang's team was finally closing in. The problem was, Bearclaw wasn't going down without a fight. Zhang moved forward cautiously, his instincts guiding him like a compass. His enhanced vision swept the area, his body instinctively ducking behind thick tree trunks, avoiding the sparse but deadly traps scattered through the jungle by the rogue military group that was running these genetic experiments. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows, massive and hulking. Bearclaw. Zhang's eyes locked on him instantly. The beast was covered in thick, matted fur, his eyes wild with that strange, primal glint that only someone who had been genetically altered to be more animal than man could have. The roar that followed was deafening, a guttural, primal sound that echoed across the jungle like a threat. Zhang's body was already in motion before he even registered what was happening. His legs pushed off the ground with the velocity of a freight train, moving faster than any human could. He was already behind a nearby rock when Bearclaw swung a massive fist toward the space he had just vacated. The air itself seemed to tremble as the impact hit the earth. "You've got to be kidding me," Zhang muttered under his breath. With a sniper's precision, he lined up a shot and fired. The tranquilizer dart struck Bearclaw in the neck, but it barely slowed him down. The beast roared, thrashing through the jungle like a tornado. Zhang didn't waste time thinking. He was already moving, his enhanced speed making him a blur in the underbrush. His mind focused on one thing: getting close enough to finish the job. The distance between him and the mutant closed in seconds. He dodged low-hanging branches, his mind calculating every angle, every movement. He could hear the crunch of Bearclaw's heavy footsteps, the air pulsing with the brute force of the beast's strikes as he smashed through the jungle like a rampaging bull. Zhang didn't hesitate. He vaulted over a fallen log, his body twisting mid-air, his aim steady as he lined up another shot. This time, he aimed for Bearclaw's heart. The dart found its mark. Bearclaw stumbled, his huge body swaying as the tranquilizer took hold. But Zhang knew it wasn't over. The beast was huge, powerful, and his genetic enhancements made him nearly impervious to standard tranquilizers. Zhang only had a few seconds before Bearclaw was back on his feet, and that would be the end of it. With the precision of a hawk, Zhang closed the gap in an instant, and before Bearclaw could react, Zhang was on him. The two collided in a mess of fur, blood, and muscle, the ground beneath them cracking with the force of their struggle. Zhang's body was an instrument of pure kinetic energy, his enhanced strength allowing him to hold his own against the behemoth of a man. But even as he wrestled, he felt the familiar itch in the back of his mind, the hunger, the thirst for violence, the feeling of power. He could feel the animal within him, stirring, urging him to finish the job in a way he knew he would regret. "Control yourself, Zhang," he muttered under his breath. "You're not him." Bearclaw roared again, his massive fist coming down like a hammer. Zhang dodged, spinning around to land a strike to the back of the mutant's head. It was enough. The tranquilizer finally did its job, and the beast slumped to the ground. Zhang stood over him, breathing heavily, his mind reeling. The adrenaline was still rushing through his veins, but so was that gnawing feeling, the feeling of being too close to the edge. He had fought with everything in him to keep the animal inside in check, but it was always there, lurking. He hated it. Zhang reached for his comms. "Target neutralized," he said flatly, his voice sounding emptier than he wanted it to. "I'm heading back." On his way back to the extraction point, Zhang's mind drifted. As his body moved on autopilot, he couldn't shake the thoughts that had been creeping into his mind for the past few weeks. The genetic modifications that had made him the perfect soldier were slowly driving him insane. Every mission, every fight, the bloodier it got, the more he felt the animal side of him pushing forward. The heightened senses, the enhanced reflexes, the sheer power, they were both a blessing and a curse. What had once been a gift was becoming something darker, something he feared he couldn't control anymore. "Zhang," Lin Ji's voice crackled through the comms again. "What's going on? You sound off." Zhang swallowed hard. "I'm fine." "Yeah, sure you are. I can hear it in your voice. You've been pushing yourself too hard. You need to get out of the field for a bit. Talk to someone. You've been on edge lately. Maybe it's time to see Dr. Xian." Dr. Xian was their top military psychiatrist, an expert in treating soldiers who had undergone extreme genetic enhancements. Zhang had seen Xian before. He wasn't a stranger. But the idea of going back to him, it felt like admitting defeat. "I don't need a shrink," Zhang muttered, even though deep down, he knew Xi was right. He was losing control. The rest of the ride back to the extraction point was silent. Zhang didn't need words to know that something was wrong, that this wasn't going to be an easy fix. And deep down, he feared he might never get back to who he once was. But there was no turning back now. Zhang was silent for the rest of the trip back. The air in the extraction chopper was thick with the smell of sweat and gunpowder. The hum of the rotors above drowned out the world, but his thoughts buzzed louder than the engines. He had known something was wrong for a while now, but the sight of Bearclaw, the rogue super soldier, the freak of nature, was the last straw. That battle had been too close. He had felt it, the animal inside, pushing him, urging him to finish the fight in a way that made him less human and more, well, whatever the hell Bearclaw was. Zhang stared out of the window, watching the jungle shrink beneath them as the helicopter ascended into the sky. He tried to focus on the landscape, but his mind kept drifting back to the moment when he'd nearly lost control. The smell of the mutant's blood still lingered in his nostrils, mixing with the smell of his own sweat. His body was still thrumming with the aftershock of the fight, his senses hyper-aware. He could hear the soft hum of the helicopter's engines, feel the thrum of his heartbeat under his skin, the rush of adrenaline still cycling through his veins. "Zhang," Lin Ji said again, breaking the silence, "you sure you're good?" Zhang didn't respond at first. His fingers tightened around the strap of his rifle, knuckles white from the pressure. His jaw clenched. "I'm fine," he muttered. The words felt hollow, even to him. But he couldn't admit it, couldn't let anyone see how close he was to losing it. If they knew, if they saw that weakness, the team would pull him off the front lines. He couldn't afford that. He was a weapon. A tool. And tools didn't get to rest. "You're not fine," Ji said, his voice sharp. "You've been losing it lately. I don't know how many more missions like this you can handle. Not if you keep playing it off." Zhang's eyes narrowed. "I said I'm fine. Drop it." Ji's silence stretched between them, but Zhang could feel the weight of his gaze, even through the static of the comms. He could feel Ji's concern, but he didn't have the time or the energy to address it. The rest of the ride passed in uneasy quiet. The chopper finally touched down at their base, a secluded, high-tech military facility tucked away in the mountains. Zhang stepped off the helicopter, his boots hitting the tarmac with a heavy thud, but the weight in his chest didn't lift. The familiar sterile air of the base did nothing to calm the storm brewing inside him. "Zhang," Ji said as he followed him toward the command center. "You're going to see Dr. Xian, right?" Zhang didn't look at him. Instead, he just kept walking, eyes forward, moving with the kind of practiced precision that had become second nature. He didn't want to deal with Dr. Xian. He didn't want to talk to anyone about this. Not yet, but when he reached the medical wing, the sound of Xian's calm voice over the intercom made him pause. He couldn't avoid it anymore. "Captain Zhang, please report to my office for your scheduled check-in." Zhang exhaled sharply, his fists clenched at his sides. He had been avoiding Xian's appointments for weeks now, brushing them off with the same tired excuses, "I'm fine," or "I don't need it." But now, there was no escaping it. With a resigned sigh, Zhang pushed through the door and into the sterile white room, his eyes already locking onto the ever-calm figure of Dr. Xian. The doctor was sitting behind his desk, a tablet in hand, his expression unreadable. He was a small man, with sharp features and a soft voice, a stark contrast to the towering figure of Zhang. "Captain Zhang," Xian said, his tone professional but carrying an undertone of concern. "Please, take a seat." Zhang stood by the door for a moment longer than necessary, letting the silence stretch. It wasn't that he didn't trust Xian, it was that he didn't trust himself. He didn't trust that if he opened up, if he said the words out loud, he wouldn't completely break down. And that would be the end of it. His mission. His career. His purpose. But after a long, deep breath, he sat down. Xian tapped a few commands on his tablet, his eyes never leaving Zhang's face. "Tell me how you're feeling, Zhang," Xian said, his voice soft but firm, like a steady hand reaching out in a storm. "I'm fine," Zhang repeated, the words automatic, almost like a reflex. Xian's eyes flicked up from his tablet, studying him for a long moment. "Are you?" Zhang's eyes narrowed, but he didn't answer. He didn't need to. Xian already knew. "Zhang," Xian said quietly, "you're not the first soldier to undergo these modifications. You know that, right? Many of them, like you, have struggled with the animal instincts that come with enhanced abilities. You've been pushing yourself too hard. You've been fighting yourself." Zhang clenched his jaw. He hated this. Hated talking about it, hated that it was becoming too much to ignore. "I'm not like the others." "I'm not suggesting you are," Xian said gently. "But you've been showing signs of imbalance. Your reactions, the heightened aggression. It's not uncommon, especially in soldiers with your modifications." Zhang was silent for a long time, his fists clenched at his sides. Xian's words hit too close to home, even though Zhang had known this was coming. He had always been different after the enhancements. But lately, it was getting harder to separate the man from the animal inside him. "I'm losing control," Zhang said finally, his voice quieter than he intended. Xian nodded slowly, his expression softening. "That's why we need to talk about your options. We've developed a treatment, a way to reverse some of the more extreme effects of the modifications. It won't be easy, and it's not guaranteed to work, but it could help you regain some balance. Zhang's head snapped up, his gaze hard. What do you mean, reverse? We've found a way to restabilize your DNA, Xian explained. The enhancements you underwent, while powerful, have left a mark on your genetic code. The treatments we've developed can revert me back to a normal man? Zhang interrupted, his voice bitter. You think I want to go back to that? To who I was before? Xian's expression remained calm, but his voice held a trace of caution. I think you're tired of fighting yourself, Zhang. You're tired of living in constant fear of losing control. This could give you a chance at a life outside of constant combat. Outside of being a weapon. Zhang's chest tightened. Xian was right. He was tired of the constant battle, tired of feeling like a monster. But there was something else, something deeper. He stood up abruptly, cutting Xian off. I don't know if I can do that. I don't know if I can go back to being that. Xian didn't try to stop him as Zhang walked to the door. Take your time, he said softly. But don't wait too long. Zhang didn't look back. He didn't need to hear any more. His mind was already made up. The battle inside him would never stop, no matter how many treatments Xian had to offer. He would either learn to control the animal within him, or he would give in to it. But whatever path he chose, there was no going back. It wasn't until he was back in his quarters, alone, that the full weight of Xian's words began to settle in. Zhang leaned against the wall, running a hand through his hair, trying to slow the pounding of his heart. The weight of his decision pressed down on him like a heavy stone. He wasn't sure how much longer he could keep pretending that everything was fine. The cracks were showing. The animal inside him was waking up, and it wasn't going back to sleep. The only question was whether he could hold it at bay long enough to make the right choice, or if it would consume him before he could make a decision. But Zhang knew one thing for sure: the next time he went into the field, he wasn't just fighting the enemy. He was fighting himself. Zhang spent the next few days avoiding the rest of the team, withdrawing into the sterile isolation of his quarters. The constant hum of the base felt like it was closing in on him, like the walls were pressing in with every passing minute. He'd run the same thoughts through his mind 1,000 times, replaying the fight with Bearclaw, the near slip into madness, the brutal reminder that he was more animal than man. He could still feel the blood on his hands, the rush of violent instinct flooding his veins. The voices in his head, the animal voices, never stopped. They whispered to him, coaxed him, urged him to give in. They were getting louder. Take control. Don't be weak. Let it out. You're not like them. You're stronger. He clenched his fists, staring at the blank walls of his room. There was a war going on inside him, and he was losing ground. The longer he waited, the harder it would be to stop the inevitable. And the inevitable was this: he would break. The only question was how far he'd go before that happened. When Ji came to find him 2 days later, Zhang was pacing the length of his room, a restless energy coursing through him. Ji knocked once and then stepped in, his usual cocky smile replaced by a look of concern. Hey, man. Thought I'd find you here, Ji said. His tone was light, but his eyes betrayed the worry underneath. You ready to talk yet? Zhang didn't stop pacing. I'm not ready for a damn therapy session, Ji. Ji sighed, running a hand through his short, dark hair. Come on. I've known you too long. I can tell something's eating at you. And I get it. But you don't have to carry this alone, man. Zhang stopped pacing and turned to face him, his voice low and hard. You don't understand, Ji. No one does. Not anymore. Ji took a step closer, his expression softening. I might not understand everything you're going through, but I understand you. I know the kind of man you are. You're not just some machine, Zhang. You're not just a weapon. Zhang's eyes flashed with something darker, something primal. Then why do I feel like I'm losing myself? I don't even know who I am anymore. Ji's face softened, but he didn't back down. You're still you, man. That's the whole point of this. You've been given a hell of a lot to carry, but you don't have to carry it alone. Zhang ran a hand through his hair, frustration building in his chest. I've already lost it. I'm not the same person I was before all of this. I can't even remember who I was. All I know is this hunger, this need. To fight. To kill. It's all I know. Ji took a step forward, his voice firm. And that's why you need to let someone help. You can't do this by yourself. If you keep going like this, you won't just lose who you were. You'll lose who you could be. Zhang looked at him for a long moment, his heart pounding in his chest. He wanted to push Ji away. He wanted to shut down, to go back to the cold, isolated version of himself that had been able to carry out missions without hesitation. But there was something about Ji's words, about the unwavering concern in his eyes, that made something inside him crack. I'm scared, Ji, Zhang said, his voice quiet. I'm scared I'm going to snap. That one day I'm going to lose control and, don't, Ji interrupted, stepping closer, his hand coming down on Zhang's shoulder. Don't do that to yourself. You won't snap. Not with the people around you. Not with me. We've been through a hell of a lot together, man. You don't have to do this alone. Zhang closed his eyes, letting the weight of Ji's words settle over him. He didn't know if Ji was right. He didn't know if he could ever truly control the beast inside him. But for the first time in a long time, the wall he had built up around himself cracked just a little. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Zhang didn't return to his quarters after that conversation. Instead, he found himself in the training room, trying to work through the restlessness, the growing tension in his body that always accompanied the animal urges. His muscles ached, his mind burned with the need to exert control over the chaos inside him. He moved through drills, punching bags, sparring dummies, anything that would help him focus his energy. But no matter how hard he worked, it never seemed enough. By the time the sun had set and the base settled into the quiet hum of the night shift, Zhang was exhausted but still wired. He could feel the animal inside him, pacing in the dark corners of his mind, clawing at the edges of his control. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Every time his eyes closed, he was back in the jungle, face to face with Bearclaw once more. He could hear the beast's voice, feel the raw power of its body, the instinct that pulsed beneath its skin. And in those moments, Zhang could almost feel himself slipping away, could feel himself becoming something else, something dangerous. When he finally did fall asleep, it was fitful, plagued by nightmares. He woke up more than once, drenched in sweat, his heart racing. By morning, he felt like he hadn't slept at all. His head was pounding, his body sluggish from the lack of rest. But there was no time to waste. The mission was coming up. Another high-stakes operation, another target to eliminate. And Zhang wasn't sure if he was ready to face it. He wasn't sure if he was ready to face himself. When the briefing came, Zhang showed up on autopilot, his mind still reeling from the events of the previous days. He barely registered the tactical details that were laid out in front of him. His mind was too consumed with the thought of what was to come. The mission was simple: find the target, eliminate him, extract. This was what Zhang had been bred for. This was the life he knew. But in the back of his mind, he heard the whisper, what if you lose control? What if you become like them? The briefing room was filled with the usual suspects, Ji, a few other operatives, and some high-ranking officers who barely glanced at him as they went over the mission details. Zhang tuned them out, his gaze focused on the map of the city they were infiltrating. He had learned a long time ago to block out distractions. But today, it was different. His mind kept wandering back to his conversation with Ji. You don't have to do this alone. He could hear Ji's voice, soft but insistent. We've been through a hell of a lot together, man. You don't have to do this alone. Zhang didn't know if Ji was right. But he had to try. The mission went as smoothly as any operation could, but Zhang couldn't escape the sense of impending danger that clung to him. His senses were on high alert, every footstep echoing in his mind, every breath a potential trigger. The air felt charged, electric, as if the whole world was waiting for him to slip, and then, it happened, they cornered the target in a narrow alleyway. Zhang had his rifle raised, ready to take the shot, when a sudden noise from behind him caught his attention. He whipped around, instinctively, his body moving faster than his mind. A figure emerged from the shadows, and Zhang's heart skipped a beat. Another mutant. This one was different. Sleeker. Quicker. He had the instincts of a predator, and Zhang could feel the hunger radiating from him. Before Zhang could react, the mutant lunged. The fight was brutal. Zhang's enhanced reflexes were no match for the mutant's speed, and for a moment, it felt like everything was spinning out of control. The animal inside him was awake now, roaring in his chest, urging him to fight back with everything he had. His mind screamed at him to hold back, to fight like a soldier, not a beast. But the more the mutant pushed him, the more the animal in him wanted to break free. His grip on his rifle tightened. He felt the shift in his body as his senses sharpened, his muscles coiling with potential energy. It wasn't just the fight anymore. It was something darker. It was survival. With one swift motion, Zhang slammed the mutant into the wall, his hand locking around its throat. The weight of his own power made his head swim, and for a brief moment, he wondered if he was going to finish it. The urge to end the fight, to dominate, was overwhelming, but then Ji's voice cut through the fog in his mind, steady and calm. Zhang. Don't. You're better than this. Zhang's grip faltered. His body shook with the strain of holding on to the last remnants of his humanity. Slowly, he released the mutant, letting it drop to the ground. His breath was ragged, his mind a battlefield. He could feel the animal roaring inside him, demanding its due, but for once, Zhang resisted. For once, he fought back. The mission ended with the target neutralized and the mutant contained. But Zhang knew it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The battle inside him was far from won. But he had taken the first step. And that, for now, was enough.